I'm writing this from a prison cell where I'll spend the next 12 years, because what started as a harmless joke with my best friend ended with a body bag and a manslaughter conviction that destroyed 3 families forever. My name is Mark Stevens, and 3 years ago, my girlfriend Sarah and I killed our friend David with a prank. We didn't mean to. We thought we were just having fun. But David Martinez died on October 13th, 2021 at 11:47 p.m., and it's entirely our fault. Sarah and I were known for our pranks. Elaborate, creative, sometimes expensive pranks that we'd plan for weeks. We'd turn someone's entire apartment upside down while they were at work. We'd hire actors to create fake scenarios. We once convinced our friend Jake that he'd won a fake lottery for 3 whole days. But our pranks were never malicious. They were always designed to be funny stories people could laugh about later. We had one rule: nobody gets hurt. The goal was always laughter, not pain. David was our favorite target because he reacted so perfectly. He'd jump at shadows, scream at fake spiders, and fall for even obvious setups. He was also a good sport about it afterward. He'd laugh harder than anyone once he realized he'd been pranked. What we didn't know was that David had a rare genetic heart condition called arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy. He'd never been diagnosed because symptoms don't usually appear until your 20s, and David had just turned 23. He'd been having minor chest pains recently, but attributed them to stress from his new job. If we'd known about his heart condition, we never would have done what we did. But that's not an excuse. What we did was reckless and stupid, regardless of David's health. It started when Sarah found an advertisement for new holographic projection equipment online. Some startup company was renting out prototype units for events and marketing stunts. The holograms were incredibly realistic, three-dimensional images that appeared to float in midair, solid enough to look real, but translucent when you got close. "This is perfect for David," Sarah said, showing me the website on her laptop. "Remember how you freaked out when we did the fake ghost thing with the projector? This would be 10 times scarier." We knew David had a massive phobia of ghosts and supernatural stuff. He refused to watch horror movies, wouldn't even joke about seances, and got genuinely upset when people told ghost stories. Looking back, we should have recognized that this phobia was too intense to mess with. But at the time, we thought it would be hilarious. We rented the holographic equipment for $500 for one night. The company sent a technician to David's apartment building to set it up while he was at work. We'd gotten permission from his landlord by pretending we were planning a surprise birthday party. The setup was elaborate. We placed projectors in his bedroom, living room, and hallway, all connected to a central control system that Sarah operated from her laptop. We created custom holographic ghosts using video footage of people in white sheets, then digitally removed the sheets so only the transparent figures remained. The plan was simple: wait until David came home from work, then gradually ramp up the supernatural activity until he was properly freaked out. Then we'd reveal the prank, everyone would laugh, and David would grudgingly admit it was a good one. We positioned ourselves in the apartment across the hall, which belonged to David's neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She was out of town for the week, and we'd borrowed her key to use as our prank headquarters. David got home at 9:15 p.m. Through the security cameras we'd also installed, with his landlord's permission for the surprise party, we watched him enter his apartment, drop his backpack, and head to the kitchen to grab a beer. Sarah triggered the first hologram at 9:23 p.m. It was subtle, just a translucent figure that appeared for 2 seconds at the end of his hallway, then disappeared. Through the camera feed, we watched David freeze, beer halfway to his mouth. "Did you see that?" he said to himself, looking around confused. We waited 5 minutes, then triggered the second hologram. This time, a ghostly woman appeared in his living room, turned to look directly at him, then faded away.
David dropped his beer. The bottle shattered on his kitchen floor, but he didn't even notice. He was backing toward his front door, eyes wide. "Oh my God," we heard him whisper through the audio feed. "Oh my God, oh my God." That should have been our first warning. David wasn't just startled or confused. He was genuinely terrified in a way we'd never seen before. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and his hands were shaking. but we thought he was just playing up his reaction, making it dramatic for effect. David was a bit of a performer that way. Sarah triggered the third hologram at 9:31 p.m. A ghostly child appeared in his bedroom doorway, pointed directly at David, and opened its mouth in a silent scream.
David's reaction was instant and extreme. He screamed louder than I'd ever heard anyone scream, a sound of pure terror that made my stomach drop. Through the camera, we watched him stumble backward, fall over his coffee table, and scramble toward his front door on his hands and knees. "Turn it off," I told Sarah. "This isn't funny anymore." But Sarah was laughing. "Look at him. This is perfect. He's going to tell this story for years." She triggered the fourth hologram before I could stop her. This one was our grand finale, multiple ghostly figures appearing simultaneously throughout his apartment, all moving toward David with outstretched arms. That's when David collapsed. He made it to his front door and was trying to unlock it with shaking hands when all the holograms activated at once. He spun around, saw the ghostly figures advancing toward him, and let out another scream. Then he grabbed his chest, stumbled backward, and fell to the floor. At first, we thought he was still acting. David was dramatic, and it seemed like the kind of over-the-top reaction he might fake to get us back for scaring him so badly. "David," Sarah called through the hallway. "David, you can come out now. It was just a prank." He didn't respond. We waited 30 seconds, watching him lie motionless on his living room floor through the camera feed. The holograms were still running, ghostly figures floating around his unconscious body. "Turn them off," I said, panic starting to creep into my voice. Sarah shut down the holograms, and we ran across the hall to David's apartment. The door was unlocked. He'd been trying to escape when he collapsed. David was lying on his back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. His face was blue. He wasn't breathing. I started CPR while Sarah called 911. I pumped his chest and tried to breathe life back into his lungs, but his body felt wrong, empty, like no one was home anymore. 911, what's your emergency? My friend collapsed. Sarah screamed into the phone. He's not breathing. We need an ambulance at 2847 Oak Street, apartment 3B. Is he conscious? No, he's not responding to anything. Sir, I need you to continue CPR until the paramedics arrive. They're 3 minutes out. I kept pumping David's chest, counting compressions like I'd learned in the first aid class I'd taken years ago. 15 compressions, 2 breaths. 15 compressions, 2 breaths. But even as I worked, I knew it was too late. David's skin was cold, and there was something final about the stillness in his eyes. The paramedics arrived at 9:47 p.m. They worked on David for 23 minutes, trying everything: advanced CPR, defibrillation, emergency medications. But his heart never started beating again. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. The police arrived while the paramedics were still working. At first, they treated it as a medical emergency. Young, healthy people don't usually just drop dead, so they started asking questions about what David had been doing before he collapsed. That's when we had to explain about the prank. "You were using what?" Officer Martinez asked, looking confused. "Holographic projectors," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "to make fake ghosts." It was supposed to be funny. The officer looked around David's apartment, noting the scattered electronic equipment, the broken beer bottle, the overturned coffee table. "And you were operating this equipment from where?" "The apartment across the hall. We were watching through security cameras." I'll never forget the look on Officer Martinez's face when the full scope of what we'd done became clear. It wasn't just anger. It was disgust mixed with complete bewilderment at how two adults could be so thoughtlessly cruel. "So you were terrorizing your friend with fake ghosts, recording his reaction, and operating the equipment remotely so he couldn't escape or stop it?" When you put it that way, it sounded monstrous. The preliminary autopsy results came back 3 days later. David had died of sudden cardiac death caused by severe arrhythmia. The medical examiner found evidence of arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, a genetic condition that makes the heart susceptible to dangerous rhythm disorders, especially when triggered by extreme stress or fear. In other words, We have literally scared him to death. The district attorney charged us both with involuntary manslaughter. The prosecution argued that even though we didn't intend to kill David, our actions were so reckless and foreseeable in their potential to cause harm that we were criminally responsible for his death. Our defense attorney tried to argue that it was a tragic accident, that we couldn't have known about David's heart condition, that pranks between friends are normal, and this was just an unforeseeable medical emergency. But the prosecution had a strong case. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about the psychological effects of extreme fear and the known risks of shocking people with severe phobias. They showed the jury footage from our security cameras, including audio of David's terrified screams and our laughter in response. The worst part of the trial was David's family testimony. His mother, Maria Martinez, took the stand on day 4 of the trial. She was a small woman in her 50s who had clearly aged years in the 6 months since David's death. "David was my baby," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He was sensitive, yes. He got scared easily, yes. But he was kind and gentle, and he trusted his friends completely. He trusted you." She turned to look directly at Sarah and me. "He would have done anything for either of you. He helped you move apartments, Sarah. He lent you money when you were unemployed, Mark. And you repaid that kindness by terrorizing him to death for your own entertainment." David's sister Carmen testified next. She told the jury about how David had called her just 2 weeks before he died, complaining of chest pains and shortness of breath. "I told him to see a doctor," she said. But David was scared of medical stuff too. He kept saying he was too young to have heart problems, that it was probably just stress from work. If he'd been diagnosed, if we'd known about his condition, maybe we could have prevented this. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about whether Mark Stevens and Sarah Chen intended to kill David Martinez. It's about whether their actions showed such reckless disregard for human life that they should be held criminally responsible for the consequences. The defendants spent weeks planning this elaborate scheme to terrify their friend. They rented expensive equipment, installed surveillance cameras, and coordinated a sustained campaign of psychological torture that lasted over 20 minutes. They watched David's terror through their cameras and continued the assault even when it became clear he was genuinely distressed. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was not a harmless prank gone wrong. This was a deliberate, premeditated campaign to terrorize another human being, and the predictable result was David Martinez's death. Sarah and I were both convicted of involuntary manslaughter. I was sentenced to 12 years in state prison. Sarah got 8 years because she cooperated more with the investigation and showed more remorse during the trial. The judge's words at sentencing have haunted me every day for the past 3 years. "Mr. Stevens, you have expressed remorse for Mr. Martinez's death, and I believe that remorse is genuine. But remorse does not undo the harm you've caused or excuse the breathtaking cruelty of your actions. You treated your friend's terror as entertainment. You recorded his suffering for your own amusement. When it became clear that he was genuinely frightened beyond any reasonable reaction to a prank, you escalated rather than stopped. David Martinez died alone and terrified, believing he was being stalked by supernatural forces, never knowing that his trusted friends were the architects of his torment. That is a level of betrayal and cruelty that demands significant consequences. I'm now in year 3 of my sentence at Riverside Correctional Facility. Sarah is at the women's prison about 60 miles away. We're not allowed to contact each other, which is probably for the best. I don't think either of us could bear to talk about what we did. Prison is exactly as horrible as you'd imagine, but the worst part isn't the violence or the conditions or the loss of freedom. The worst part is living with what I did to David every single day. I dream about him constantly. In my dreams, he's always running from those holograms, screaming for help that never comes, dying alone and afraid while his best friends laugh from across the hall. I've received exactly 3 visitors in 3 years. My mother came once, cried for an hour, and told me she was ashamed to be my parent. My father sent a letter saying he never wanted to see me again. My sister visited last Christmas and told me about how the story had affected our entire family. She lost her job when her employer found out about the case. My parents had to move to a different town because of the harassment. And my younger brother was bullied so badly at school that he attempted suicide. David's death didn't just end his life. It destroyed everyone connected to him, including Sarah and me. I think about David's family constantly. Maria Martinez lost her youngest son because his friends thought it would be funny to terrorize him. Carmen lost her brother because we were too stupid and selfish to consider that our actions might have consequences. I think about all the things David will never get to do. He was planning to propose to his girlfriend Emma next year. He'd just gotten a promotion at his marketing job. He wanted to travel to Japan and learn photography and maybe write a book someday. All of that ended at 11:47 p.m. on October 13th, 2021, because Sarah and I thought it would be hilarious to scare him with fake ghosts. The prison counselor says that guilt and remorse are important parts of the rehabilitation process, but sometimes the guilt feels like it's going to crush me. I wake up every morning remembering that David is dead because of what I did, and I go to sleep every night knowing that no amount of remorse or punishment will ever bring him back. I have 8.5 years left on my sentence. When I get out, I'll be 35 years old, and I'll have to build an entire new life knowing that I'm a convicted killer. I'll have to find a job, a place to live, maybe try to have relationships, all while carrying the knowledge of what I did to my friend. But that's not why I'm writing this. I'm writing this because I need people to understand how easily this could happen to them. Sarah and I weren't evil people. We weren't bullies or psychopaths. We were just thoughtless and stupid, and we made a series of small decisions that led to an unthinkable tragedy. We decided David's fear was funny rather than concerning. We decided to escalate when we should have stopped. We decided our entertainment was more important than his well-being. Each decision seemed small at the time, but they added up to something monstrous. If you're someone who likes pranks, if you have friends who can take a joke, if you think scaring people is harmless fun, please think about David Martinez. Think about how a simple prank can spiral out of control in ways you never imagined. Ask yourself, is the laugh really worth risking someone's life? Is your entertainment worth potentially destroying multiple families? Is any joke worth the possibility of spending the next decade in prison knowing you killed your friend? Because I can tell you from experience, it's not. Nothing is worth what we did to David, and nothing will ever make it right. David should be 26 years old right now. He should be married to Emma, maybe thinking about kids, advancing in his career, living the life he was building for himself. Instead, he's buried in Riverside Cemetery, and I'm writing this from a prison cell. That's the real cost of our harmless prank. Not just David's life, but all the lives our actions destroyed, including our own. What would you do if a joke you thought was harmless ended up killing your best friend? What would you do if you had to live with that knowledge for the rest of your life?